Okay, so we're gonna kind of burn through these next ones. So the next one we're gonna talk about is impulse. So with impulse is simply the total force that was produced over any given time interval. So let's say we have an object that weighs 10 kilograms, or let's say we have an object that weighs 1 kilogram, we apply 10 newtons of force to it. That object will accelerate to a velocity of 10 meters per second. So it doesn't matter how long it takes us to apply 10 newtons of force. If we apply 10 newtons of force immediately by striking the object, it'll still end up with a velocity of 10 meters per second. If we apply a 10 Newton force to a 1 kilogram object very slowly, we very slowly, apply a gentle force to it over a period of several seconds, it's still going to end up with a velocity of 10 meters per second. We can always determine how much force was applied to an object by the velocity that it eventually achieves. So anytime, let's say we have like a graph of force production, we might see like in some movement where, there's no force and then the force production spikes up and then it levels off. So you can have something that's kind of like a very gradual sloping kind of force production graph, or you can have something that's very rapid and then it drops off. An impulse is simply the area under those graphs. So provided the area underneath those graphs, whether it's a very sharp and then it drops off, or it's a very slow sloping gradual one, as long as the total area under the graph is the same, then the total force output is the same. But in general, like the main takeaway is that to find impulse, all we're doing is we're taking the total force output and we're multiplying it by the time. So even if we're holding, and this really factors a lot when we start considering metrics like time under tension with weight training. A lot of people talk about time under tension, but the thing with time under tension is it's a useless metric for most exercises without also accounting for the amount of weight that you're holding over that time. What total force are you producing? 60 seconds of holding a weight that's only 100 pounds is going to be a lot different than 60 seconds of lifting a weight that is 300 pounds. They're not going to have the same training effect, assuming it's the same person, assuming that same person is doing the same thing. So when we discuss volume, when we start discussing training volume, this is probably one of the most important concepts to discuss is, well, what was their total force output over the duration of that movement. So something that we can utilize that's kind of a hack is, we have something that's called conservation of energy. And one of the ways that we can apply that is, well, if I take this ball and, I move it up, whatever, I'm applying lots of force, a little bit of force, lots of force, a little bit of force. Every time I accelerate it upwards, I'm applying a lot of force to it. Every time I allow it to decelerate downwards, I'm applying less force to it. But provided that the ball ends up in the same place, if I start from here, move it around, whatever, up and down as many times as I want, it doesn't, but if I allow it at the end to end up at the same place down here, I never added or took away any force to the system. So I can literally just take the weight of this ball in newtons and I can just multiply it over the duration of the measured time interval, and that will tell you the number of newtons. So if this ball weighed, had a weight of 10 newtons, and if gravity put 10 newtons of force on this ball and I moved it around over 10 seconds, well, 100 newtons, I applied 100 newtons of force to that ball to keep it in that same spot. As long as I didn't allow like any other object to actually like support it, like this seat here. So we can apply the same thing for weight training. So whenever we're like doing an exercise like squats or bench press, it doesn't matter how many reps you do. The total impulse that your body, the total force produced that you put into that weight implement or that bar is always going to be the same, provided the weight's the same and the total time interval is the same, and the weight ends up in the same spot as where it started. So if you're doing your bench press and you start from the bottom of the bench press, whether you lift it whether you hold it here for 60 seconds and you don't move it, or you bench it, 50 times really fast, as long as the weight's the same, and as long as between those two variables, each one took 30 seconds or whatever, the total force that you exert on that bar is always going to remain the same. So just keep that in mind as we start moving into like some of these later videos, is that impulse is really the measure of how much force the total force you produced. And other metrics that we might measure on top of that are just a part of that total force that was produced. It's a part of the total impulse. So we kind of use that to inform some of our training decisions in terms of trying to create specific training effects.